We have details from last night's town council meeting on this episode of Barnstable Today. It's Friday, August 12th, 2016. I'm Sarah Mannel. Town Council approved spending $180,000 to repair 2 private roads in Osterville. DPW Director Dan Santos presented detailed plans to the council during the meeting.
We're seeking $180,000 under the Temporary Repair to Private Roads program, whereby abutters to private roads can work with the town to design and implement temporary repairs to their roads. And under this program, the residents of these 2 roads have petitioned to the department and gone through a consent and acknowledgement agreement where 51%, greater than 51% must agree. In this case, I think it was close to 80% who have agreed to this project. The town does not take these roads, does not own these roads after the work is done. The cost is completely paid for by the residents through an abutter program. The maximum cost established for this project is $12,850 per abutter, and that's about it. I'll take any questions or have any discussion.
And Town Council voted to spend $180,000 repairing those 2 private roads in Osterville. Once old business and new business was complete for the evening, the council turned the discussion to findings from the Charter Review Committee. Town Attorney Ruth Weil talked about the proposed changes.
What we are not talking about tonight is a charter commission which is established through a petition of 15% of the registered voters, and we've had a number of those in Barnstable. I think Barnstable probably holds a record for charter commissions. What the town council's present charge here was to see if we could do any in-house amendments based on the review of the committee. I think the council president, in submitting her charge, indicated that there really hadn't been a review since the 90s, and that was the impetus which put this forward. So there are 2 ways that the council can initiate charter amendments. The first is by special act, which actually was a methodology that was available even before the Home Rule Amendment. And it involves presenting special legislation to the state legislature, as you are familiar with. And Mr. Santos mentioned the special acts we did with roads. This would be a special act that we would do for a charter change. There are certain items listed up there that require legislative action, so you cannot do it by the home rule method, which I'm going to discuss after this, and those are mode of selection, composition, and term of office of the town council or town manager. So this can only be achieved through special legislation. And several times we've gone for special legislation on those matters the town has, and we've also had a ballot question to ratify that action, and that can be in the special legislation, so that's an option. The next biennial election, which this could be done, is the town clerk tells me November 7th, 2017.
Town clerk Ann Quirk also presented changes to preliminary municipal elections within the charter.
I have a lot to say about preliminary elections.
I bet you do.
I really do, because we're so concerned with our budgets and where our money is being spent, and honestly, it is a waste of the taxpayers' money to have preliminary elections. I can vouch for going back over several years of when we did have preliminary elections, and always the person who comes out on top is the person that wins, hands down. If you start out with 4 people and you end up with 2 people on the ballot, that the top vote getter is always the one that's going to end up winning that race. The other piece of this is that you are paying for poll workers, police officers, the DPW to set up an elections location, all of my staff to stay from 8 in the morning till whenever it's completed at night after 8 o'clock. And in one case, just recently, I think we had 65 voters come out in one precinct. It's really kind of a sad state of affairs. And if you look over all that information that I have and that Linda had prior to my time as town clerk, it's years and years of information where very few people come out and vote in a preliminary election.
Could you just, for the public, just explain the preliminary election process, how many and what it gets whittled down to, and that this is just for local elections?
In our local elections, if there are 3 or more people running for one seat, we have a preliminary election in that precinct. So it based on the amount of seats available, whether or not we're going to have a preliminary election. A few years back, we had, I believe, 6 people running for one seat. Again, it didn't bring out a whole lot of people, but we did have a preliminary election in that precinct. So it's based on the precinct, or in the case of myself, if I had, if there were 4 people running for the town clerk's position, then it would be the entire town would have a preliminary election. And it just comes out, and when the entire town has an election, you're talking $30,000.
Another item discussed was the use of a charter objection to delay a vote before the council. Town Councilor Will Crocker talked about proposed changes to using the charter objection.
This one, we had a lot of discussion on, wide-ranging discussions on this. We went from one end of the idea to the other end of the idea, basically from eliminating the whole idea of a charter objection to what we have come up with here, which is what we consider a middle ground, which is retaining the charter objection, but giving it some limitations. And that's one of the things that we're looking at with regard to charter objections. The second thing that we were looking at was just exactly when and where you can object. And we think we have come down with some good language to finally settle that as to when and where it can be used. Section 2.8, measures, emergency measures, and charter objections. What we have done is we've made our changes in subsection C. Basically, first thing we're going to do is we are eliminating the area that says if 2 members shall object, such postponement shall be until the next regular meeting, but for an emergency measure, at least 4 members in all must object. We have changed this around. We have removed that, and as you can see, what subsection C now reads is charter objection except for an emergency measure as defined in section 2.8, section B. On the first occasion that the question of an adoption of a measure is put to the town council, if a single member objects to the taking of the vote shall be postponed until the next meeting of the town council, whether regular or special, and you can call a special. That hasn't changed. A charter objection shall have privilege over all motions, but must be made, and this is the second part, must be made at the call for a vote on the measure by the presiding officer, and all debate will cease at that point. I don't think the rest of that changed at all. This procedure shall not be used for any more than once for any matter bearing a single docket number, notwithstanding any amendment. I think that that stuff was not changed. That specific language was not changed. That was changed back in 1995. So basically, we've eliminated 2 members objecting, and we have actually now tightened up the language for when you can actually call.
And the proposed changes will be reviewed again by the Charter Review Committee before coming back before the Council for their approval. Well, be sure to tune in to our hour-long news program, Barnstable This Morning, weekdays at 8 a.m. On Monday's show, we will chat with Town Manager Mark Ells. We'll meet local author Sandra Bolton. Plus, we'll have all the news and information you need. For Barnstable Today, I'm Sarah Mantle.